Hi everybody, it's Melissa from Welcome to the Woods. In this video, I'm going to show you how I created these very strong but also very skinny floating shelves in my kitchen remodel through an unconventional method. I started with a laser level, and this ran a laser across the wall to make sure that my shelves are going to be mounted properly. I measured to where they needed to be. The ceiling and the floor are a little wonky, so a laser level was the best way to go. Then I ran painter's tape along there and painted it dark just so that I would have a permanent level line to base my shelving brackets off of. To completely hide the bracket hardware that holds up these shelves, I'm lining them up with my level line tracing around the bracket, and I'm finding the stud with this magnetic stud finder you see on the wall there. It finds the hardware on the stud instead of trying to sense the wood, so it's a no-fail way. And you can see here I'm cutting through the drywall with my multi-tool, and this just pops out that little piece of drywall so I can recess the bracket behind it right on the stud. These brackets hold 150 pounds, and I want this shelf to be very, very strong because I want to be able to put like plate stacks on there and just heavy things. I don't want them to sag away from the wall over time. And this is also a reason that I actually staggered the brackets, like one up, one down, every other along the whole wall, because in my theory, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like this is going to help distribute the weight a little better and allow the shelf brackets to not pull in one direction off the wall. Super important that not only am I following my level line that I painted on the wall, but I'm also checking with a long level the brackets I've already installed to make sure everything is lined up and my shelf is going to be level when I'm done. Now, I want to mention this video is sponsored by Work Pro Tools, and throughout this whole video, you'll see me use a lot of their hand tools. They are sponsoring this video to celebrate Woodworking Month. So if you enjoy woodworking, be sure to check out all of the awesome products that they have available on their site. You can click the link in the description below. Now, to patch that drywall, I really should have shaved off the depth on these little pieces of drywall, fit them into place, and then mudded over. But I only did that in a couple places, and then I just decided, screw it, I'm going to use fiber tape. I have no idea if this mesh tape is strong enough to do what I'm trying to make it do here. And if you were to try and recreate this shelf, I would definitely recommend either patching it with thinner drywall, like maybe you could put 1/4 inch drywall here, or you could also get one of those like more heavy duty patches, like with a metal mesh instead of fiberglass tape. But that's what I did. I ran a bunch of fiberglass tape over each bracket spot, and then I covered it in mud. I think I did like 3 coats, and then I primed and painted. And when I was done, you would never know that the brackets were recessed into the wall. I showed this on my TikTok, and if you don't follow me on TikTok, the link's in the description if you're interested. I had so many people comment and say, like, the next owner is never going to be able to figure out how to disassemble these shelves. But, you know, in this lake house, my husband and I plan to own it for a very long time. And this is actually the home's second kitchen, so it's not going to be heavily used. I imagine that if it ever gets changed out, I will actually be the one who does it. So not too worried about that. Now with the brackets in place, I'm going to start cutting the lumber for my shelves. I did price out solid lumber, which would have been my preference to build these shelves, but it was going to cost a little over $300 for just like poplar, one of the cheapest woods. And so instead, I bought a $90 sheet of cabinet grade plywood, maple plywood, that's 3/4 inches thick, and I am going to cut all the pieces that I need out of this one sheet by carefully planning out where I cut the strips versus where I cut the wider pieces. One trick I want to share with you is that if your blade is slightly dull, or like me, you're working with a blade that's meant for ripping instead of fine cutting, you can lay down some painter's tape, and that's going to make your plywood chip significantly less as you run your blade across it. The shelves I'm cutting are going to be 11 inches deep, and at first I'm running them all on my circular saw just straight because my blade on my table saw was a smoother cut for me to do a bevel. But I am going to bevel all the edges so that they meet at a 45-degree angle and make it look like one solid piece of wood. You can see here I'm using my Work Pro clamps and the combination square as my straight edge. This makes a really easy cross cut on such a long piece of plywood. And the foam underneath is just to support my piece. It's really helpful to get yourself a 4x8 sheet of foam for any circular saw cutting. Now this is an embarrassing clip to show because my table saw blade was dull, and after this cut, and you can see the machine smoking, I switched out the blade right away, and I switched it out with a Diablo fine finishing that worked way better to do all these beveled 45-degree edges. Cutting all my pieces for the shelves took a total of like 5 hours. It really took a lot of time, and look at all the sawdust that I created. This is just off the table saw. This doesn't even include what I already cleaned up after my circular saw. So now that all my pieces were cut, it's time to start the finish, and I'm going to be using the WorkPro sanding tools set. It has a bunch of sanding sheets in it, and I wrap it around a sponge so that there's no hard edges that can accidentally take off too much. The sponge is just gentler on the wood, and I came across all the beveled edges and the faces of each board. I didn't want to use a random orbital sander because I was worried about it being too aggressive and eating through the layers of plywood. Before staining, I did put down a pre-stained wood conditioner. I know maple is a softer wood and you should always use this on maple, but I don't know if that's true for maple plywood. I just thought it was insurance to make sure my stain job turned out well. The stain job, I started out with chestnut color, and then as I was going, I just realized it was too light and a little too red. So with the second coat of stain, I actually mixed the chestnut with a bit of American walnut, and that deepened the color. This is more of what I'm looking for. The color, I'm actually trying to match the existing trim work in the house because I'm not going to paint it or change it. I want to go with what was already existing from like the 1950s. So it kind of had my work cut out for me because the trim work has maybe faded over time or shifted color from what it originally was. I can't match it perfectly. The next step was to cut spacers for the wood assembly. The brackets are going to be what actually holds the weight of the shelf, but I need a shelf that is 2¼ inches tall. So these spacers are going to go between the 2 3/4 inch sheets of plywood to give me exactly the right depth. Does that make sense? So I'm using my gripper here. If you've never seen one of these, it's a push block for your table saw. It makes little cuts like this a little safer. Now let's assemble. This video is sponsored by WorkPro tools. Throughout this project, you'll see me use WorkPro tools because of their ingenuity and power. My favorite has been the 5-in-1 workbench. You can adjust the height and transform it to do so many things. I've used it the most as a scaffolding to work more safely when renovating. The wheels and casters allow it to transform to a dolly or a creeper for mechanic work. I've used it this way as a rolling platform to move things around with ease. It can become a workbench top with storage for your tools and helpful measurements handy. Add the included rails and the workbench even becomes a sliding miter saw stand. And if you're wiser than me and have your miter saw hooked into a shop vac, there's a whole power strip right on the side. Check out WorkPro tools by clicking on the link in the description of this video, and for a limited time, get 15% off this versatile workbench with my discount code. So step 1 is to nail your spacers onto your top board. And my board is 11 inches deep. My spacers are 10¼ because I had to account for that beveled edge. I nailed them with 1-inch long 16 gauge finish nails. Then I flipped it upside down, put it on top of my bracket system, and I'm going to put little 3/4 inch wood screws through the bottom of the bracket into the piece of plywood, and this is going to hold it into place on top. At this point, you want to make sure it's exactly where you want to put it and push tight against the wall. Then I put the bottom board up against those wood spacers, and I shot 2-inch brad nails up through the spacer into the whole shelf. This is connecting the bottom board, the top board, and the spacer all together. So that bottom board isn't going to carry any weight, so it doesn't matter that it's not attached to the bracket. Now the little face pieces that are only 2½ inches wide, everything is beveled, like I said, so these ones are going to fit right into place and make this look like a solid piece of wood. These I was planning to just glue and try and figure out how to clamp them so that no hardware would be visible, but I did end up shooting the 2-inch brad nails into these as well, just so they're very secure. And those brad nail holes are pretty tiny. I didn't think they were super visible in the end product, so I'm okay with it. My system for leveling really worked out very well. Every shelf I checked afterwards leveled perfectly and looked awesome. On the other side of the kitchen, I'm making a much longer shelf, and this is in a L shape. So in the corner it meets at a 90 degree, but I didn't miter that corner. I decided to just have them butt up next to each other. So you can see I mounted the corner piece first, and then I'm putting the longer piece on. And here I'm shooting some long brad nails between the two shelves just to connect them together slightly and keep them level. So this shelf went together the same way, and I am really thinking that while this is going to be difficult to take apart in the future, if I ever do, what's really cool about this design is that there's no hardware showing and just those tiny little nail holes are visible from the outside. Yet they're very, very strong, and I was able to make them as skinny as I wanted. In fact, if you wanted to, you could just not even add the spacers, and you can make a shelf only 1.5 inches thick and still have it just as strong. So I think that's pretty cool about this design. I'd love to know in the comments what you think of this brainchild of mine, if you think this is a good way to construct a floating shelf or how you would do things differently. I want to take this moment now to invite you to follow me on other channels. My TikTok is growing quickly. I'm almost at 30,000 followers already, having just started in January. My Instagram, you get to see lots of behind the scenes in my stories every day and a little more of my family life. You can come follow me there in the description on this video. You can find the links. The last couple pieces of the front face on this last shelf were super satisfying to put together because they fit beautifully, and there's no better satisfaction than knowing like your measurements and all your angles, it all worked out in the end, and the finished product looked pretty dang good, if I may say so myself. Now, whenever you're having these 45-degree angles come and meet, you're going to have a small seam, a gap, and I have a trick for closing that gap. It works a lot better on solid wood, which is actually the reason I wanted to build these with solid wood, had it not been for the exorbitant price tag. But I am going to try it on plywood as well. This works very well, so stick it in your back pocket if you don't know this trick already. What you do is you take the shank of a screwdriver and you run it over the seam, smashing the wood together. Then you can lightly sand until that gap disappears. I did this all over these shelves, and when I was done, I reapplied the stain finish. Now, I did restain pretty much the whole shelf for a third coat, especially the front faces were a little too light and needed a little more color. Then, when that stain was completely dry, I came across and I sealed all the shelves with a 1-coat polyurethane. This is actually a water-based polyurethane, and you get triple the thickness in just 1 coat. The only downside of this is it dries really, really fast, and so you have to apply it quickly. That's why I'm using a foam roller, but it's also easy to get bubbles when you roll on poly, so it definitely takes some finesse. I do have a video actually, if you want to check it out, on how to apply poly that I prefer. But I would say that this worked out pretty well. It didn't dry and gum up, and after only 1 coat, the sealed shelves looked really, really beautiful. Here is the finished look on my floating shelves. I think that they turned out super, super beautiful, and I'm excited to show you how they work with the rest of the design in this kitchen. I think you're going to be amazed at all of the aspects that come together with not only how thick I made the shelves, but also like where they end and what that's going to look like. I do have this little gap on the top and on the bottom where the 2 shelves in the L corner meet, and I would love your ideas in the comments on how I can fix that. I was considering putting some backer rod in there and then covering it with like a color matched caulk, but I don't know. At the end of my run of cabinets in this corner where the long shelf ends, I'm actually going to put a hutch from the top of the counter all the way to the ceiling. So at this end of the shelf, I actually didn't finish it. I left it unfinished because it's going to butt up right next to that hutch in the future. Thanks again to our sponsor, WorkPro Tools, and thank you for watching my shelf project. I hope that you liked this video, and if you did, consider subscribing. We'll catch you again next time on Welcome to the Woods.